Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Gildea. I'm a landscape architect, and I've got 20 years of experience in horticulture and 20 years of experience in landscape architecture, non-consecutive. So I've been working for a long time. I worked for 20 years in horticulture. I'm a certified arborist and a certified horticulturist, certified whatever, tree risk assessor. Also, one of the things that we deal a lot with in shade gardening is trees. So I'm going to cover that a little bit. So just to start, as a landscape architect, a lot of what I'm used to doing is getting sort of a blank slate. It's a building project. That's kind of the definition of landscape architecture, is that built landscape. And it's so far away from what we think of as using native plants. But this is the National Library for the Study of George Washington at Mount Vernon. It's a project that I had the privilege to work on a team, and it was conceived of because that land was never developed before this building was built, as it was never, the soil was never changed. So we conceived of this as a native plant garden and as George Washington's forest and George Washington's garden. And so it's mostly native plants. Things were used that were slightly outside of the range, and we did use some non-native evergreens at the request of the client for winter interest. But I think it turned out very good, and it's especially beautiful in winter. So for this, this was created wholesale out of nothing, except for, we had the subsoils and the existing soils, but they were damaged during the building process. I really want to walk you through a project I did. Both of these projects I worked on with Michael Bergeson. And so I want to just talk to you about gardening with native plants. And actually what we're going to talk about is gardening and editing with native plants in the shade. I'm like everyone else. I go to a nursery, or maybe a lot of you. I don't know how you are. Maybe you aren't really like this. I go to a nursery and I get a serious case of plant love. But that's not where I start. I like to start with what I have. So in this case, I had a client that bought a beautiful piece of property on a lake in the Finger Lake region in New York. It's a place that's subject to flooding in the spring. It is on the lake. The lake winds come toward it's on the east side of the lake. This is where we started. This was the beginning when they were beginning to lay out the house. They hired a very good landscape architect, a very famous one. But this is where I came in. I came in after everything was already decided and kind of just damaged and disturbed. I would say mostly disturbed. The soils there are shale. It's really important to understand your soils. And in this case, all of the land is just decomposing rock. And look at this building site. It's right on the shore, and this is what the shore looked like. They got loaders parked under the trees, and the beach is denuded all the way up to the shoreline. So what I want to start, a lot of you asked about maybe ivy or bamboo, and so start there. The first thing we did was take out the tree of heaven that were there. A lot of their plant material is similar to ours, even though their growing season is much, much shorter. Their soils are different, however. And I'm going to walk you through that as a kind of a way to think through working on your site. So while you're thinking about everything else, before you get your plant list together, go ahead and remove your invasive species the reason why they're called invasive is because they will overgrow everything else. So nothing can really compete with bamboo or English ivy. And then look around at the site and similar sites. So on this site, in the undisturbed areas, I found aster. These are the wood aster and maidenhair ferns. Across the stream, where it was undisturbed, you see Mayapple here. I'm sorry, this is bloodroot. In the early spring, and all kinds of ferns, New York ferns, which is Philoptris coming in, and Virginia creeper. Later in the season, you see different kinds of Solomon seals and Neanthemum and Caulifilum. Further up, there's a waterfall, and you can see this plant here is a sycamore, but also there's elderberry, red elderberry, and quite a bit of flowering raspberry, sugar maples at the top of the hill. And again, here's the caulifilum right here with the berries. And different kinds of actia, which one of them is called doll's eyes, and I don't remember the other name for the common name. Here's the flowering raspberry. And then a lot of different kinds of shoreline, let's go back one. At the top of the ridge, there's a sedge meadow with sugar maples. It's a natural sedge meadow, and then along the shoreline, a lot of different kinds of native plants combined with different non-native plants that aren't invasive that were introduced during early settlement in the 1700s. So I just identified everything that was there, just made a list. And then I looked around in the local region for less disturbed sites and tried to understand them. And this is a state park down at the south of Lake Seneca paths were added during by the WPA during Roosevelt's terms. And it's really interesting because every time the canyon turns, a different plant community is there. So that helped me quite a bit. So now you know, you've done the research, what wants to be there. You've identified what's there, and you've looked for a site that's similar, that has the same kinds of trees, that is healthy, and made a plant list, or maybe you just looked it up online. So I would say, think like a system. This is a tree pose. Think like a system. So look at the system that you're planting in. And so what I came up here is that there was a red cedar plant community, a hickory oak ash plant community, and two different ones, and then sedge grass rush, and then the sugar maple basswood ash plant community. And I think a lot of you are going to have similar to a sugar maple basswood ash community, only we might call it an oak hickory forest. And the ones of you that have wet areas probably have a maple floodplain kind of situation. In the next, I realize I'm rushing through this, and I can go back during the question period, but I don't want to spend all my time talking about what I do, but just the thought process. So begin where you are, understand your site, decide what could grow there based on your site, not based on what you love. And then consider the trees. So you want to identify all the trees on your site because it matters. Their root systems are all different. If you have a tulip tree on your property, Liriodendron tulipifera, they're extremely sensitive to disturbance. And if you cut their roots, they don't compartmentalize well. And so they tend to have cavities, get cavities very easily. And what not being able to compartmentalize well means that your trees can't control decay that goes up and down inside the tree. A tree that's hollow isn't necessarily dangerous, but it can be once the walls get too thin. So maples all have shallow roots, so you'd want to know that you have a maple if you have a maple, and what kind of maple it is. And oaks have deeper roots, so it's really good to understand. And by identifying your trees, you can find out what kind of things grow with those trees. Every different tree has a different associated mycorrhizal fungal community, and those communities that feed all of the other plants. And so like what we've been talking about a lot, and I know all of you are aware of this, is that trees like to grow in community. And so, and one of those communities is the fungal community within which it lives. So you want to choose other plants that like that community. And then you can't go wrong. So think like a tree. Don't cut the roots. So I usually say, try not to cut a root bigger than your thumb. If you're digging, try not to disturb those roots. Try not to garden under trees. Don't fill, don't change the hydrology. What can you do if I say all that? What I say, be careful about planting a row of shrubs all the way under a canopy, because that's like trenching and separating off a section of your canopy. Sorry, this isn't advancing on its own. I had put in the fade function. So consider the trees that try not to fill. So you can put compost down, but not soil. So I discourage you from putting soil. You don't want to put more than 4 inches of compost. Don't put it up against the tree flare. Trees are, especially bigger trees, have adapted to your site. Most of our trees are not planted. Some of them are, but they're still adapted to the site, so you don't want to change that site. You see how far tree roots can go beyond the canopy. So the first thing at our site we did is to take this cottonwood and then put a fence around it. And you can see that the fence didn't even help, because truck backed over it. And it's not an adequate root zone, but it's as much as we could do. Usually you want to preserve, if this is a 20-inch tree, for example, I'd want to preserve a 40-foot circle around the tree. Trees that all grow together are a little different. But most of you are planting under tree canopy, and what I want you to think of is that the tree and the roots, they're not really the problem. The problem is that we have to think about what grows together, and how your soil's doing, how healthy it is. I was given this drawing to start with. It was already done when I showed up, and this is called a concept drawing for those of you that aren't designers. And the idea was 2 meadows and the woodland going through from ridge to ridge through the center. And these houses are, this is the main house, an office, and then a guest house, and out the back guest house window you can see the waterfall we saw earlier. And so I put together a very short list of plants. Of course, this plant community is much more complicated, but you can't always get all of the plants. And nature can add complexity. I think what we do a lot of times is to try to add everything in because we like to garden, but trees don't really like us to garden. So I just encourage you to plant some plants, and then they'll fill in as has happened here. So before you plant, you might have a really eroded area. You might, the soil might seem like it has a sheen or it's growing moss and it looks damaged. And so you want to add compost, maybe allow the leaves to fall for a couple years and leave them, or use arborist wood chips, not shredded hardwood mulch, not pine bark mulch, but whole wood chips that come out of somebody chipping up a tree that's not diseased. So that's an important part of it. And that has been shown to restore soil. You can do that on a slope. And I've tried it in my own community where we've had serious erosion problems. Just put down 2 to 4 inches of wood chips. And as they compost, they change the way the soil works. And so they began to allow the soil to work again, because their soil, all of the small particles wash into the macro pores of the soil, and soil has to breathe. And so when all those tiny little clay particles we have in our region wash into those macro pores, the soil quits functioning the way it's supposed to, and it becomes unhealthy, and then it continues to erode. So the first thing is to get the soil back to a functioning environment, not by adding soil, but by adding either compost, which is a natural kind of thing, right? Leaf litter falls and it makes the top profile of the soil. So you don't have to mix it in, and you shouldn't. You shouldn't mix in under trees. You are only top dressing. So start there. Every time you dig under a tree, you set it back a year. You know, if you dig under the whole tree, you're disturbing all the little hair roots that are feeding the tree, and so it declines for a year before it comes back. So just top dress. And this is what we came back with after we did all of this. We put down some compost, which was municipal waste, just leaves that were ground up by Rochester, and under the trees. These trees were preserved. They had the Amish build a tent around this so they could work through the winter. Their winters are long, and they just had the trees inside. The water table's really high here, so we didn't have to water. Some of you have high water tables from what you said. So we planted a very simple palette of 5 to 10 plants in different areas. There's a drainage area that has one kind of plant, and then higher areas that have another. And then nature started filling it in. We used seed mix to seed the meadow. It was all local eco-type seed. And look at this in the spring, how well it filled in. It's just wood aster, native ferns, Canadian ginger, rather common, zigzag goldenrod, some phylloxera, pretty sedge, Appalachian sedge, or Pennsylvania sedge, phylloxera, which is New York fern. These hophorn beans, which are astraea, they were in this picture as preserved, and in this picture as planted, and you can see the architect complained that they looked planted because they were too perfect. He didn't like it, but they've since naturalized. And here we planted black willow, and we originally planted a grass, but this coltsfoot in the foreground, the asters and goldenrod all came in by themselves. Here is the meadow coming in, and we used a really wide seed mix and just figured things would sprout where they liked it. And they have, the edges have flowers that have come up, different kinds of perennials. And then we planted plugs under the trees. So plugs are a good way not to disturb your trees too much. You want to not disturb more than 1/3 of the root zone. And the root zone is, again, if I have a 10-inch tree, then I have a 20-foot circle that I have as an area, 20-foot diameter circle. And here, years later, now it's been more than 10 years, it's quite grown in quite a bit, and we're editing. So things are coming in by themselves. We have a huge amount of caulophylum that has come in all by itself, which is blue cohosh. And we've been trying to encourage tree canopy and eupatorium, which I'm sorry, I don't know the name for that. That's common name, but it's a white one, and trying to suppress it by allowing more shade to grow in. There's a lot of raspberries, flowering raspberry, which we just had removed in groups just to make it pretty. So now it's only editing that's happening and no more planting. And here's what the shoreline looks, and these are black willows in different ages that we left from the original shoreline. So find something similar. A precedent is what we call it in landscape architecture, and use that image to guide your work. So you might, this is an area called, I think it's Devil's Quarry. It's down by Lexington, Virginia. And it's a sourwood and Pieris floribunda forest. I know I'm not supposed to mix common and scientific names, but I don't know another name for Pieris floribunda. And it has this beautiful, I think this is Galium here, this beautiful forest ground cover. So if you had an intimate setting, you could choose something like this. Or if you had a large setting, you could choose a place that felt more like a meadow running under trees. This is just a native hardwood forest, our native hardwood forest. I think this is in Reston. So you see some hay-scented ferns, and this is amelanchier and greenbrier, the serviceberry and greenbrier. This is up in the mountains, up in the George Washington National Forest. Some lady slippers hiding under native azaleas on a ridge line. Down at UVA, this is a designed planting that looks natural on their pond. Wood meadow, which the other meadow was also longwood. It's a designed meadow in Appalachia, heuchera here, and this is Mount Laurel at Great Falls. So find a natural setting that's healthy, and use that. This is Rance up in Linden, and Vaccinium, which is that whole blueberry family. This is at Thompson Wildlife Management Area, geraniums, Senecio, what's that? Pacra aurea. I know, I'm just so bad with telling you, with crossing out these names, but anyhow, and all of these trilliums here, which are called, some of these are called wake robins, and so I encourage you to use a simple plant palette and let nature add in the detail. If you're already beyond that, because you've got it so detailed, and you're finding that your garden has legibility issues, or you're a collector, add more of what you have. You don't want to hear that. Oh, I don't want to hear that. I'm the worst. I have a tiny garden, and I have so many plants. I have a tiny, tiny garden, and I have Uvularia, which is I think honeybells, trillium, 5 different ferns, Solomon's seal. So I understand the problem. But notice I said 5 ferns. So I call that simple. So choose something and repeat it over and over. So you might collect all these different kinds of heuchera or kinds of foam flower, which are native to our region, or maybe false Solomon seal and Solomon seal, which is Mayanthemum is one of those false Solomon seals, but they're all the similar shapes. And so then you can repeat those over and over, and you start to get legibility in your design. This is, again, at George Washington's Mount Vernon, where this is a planted wetland, and we chose 3 species. And so just the sweet flag, this eupatorium seeded in by itself, and then we have lobelia in here, and these shrubs came in by themselves. So you can begin by planting a field and then allow the complexity to seed itself. In our neighborhood, we planted some native and I would say almost native. We planted echinacea, which is native only to the central Virginia. And some people call it Echinacea pallida, native to central Virginia. And now they're thinking about moving it back into Echinacea purpurea. But and then we planted some other native species, and we had 2 to 3 kinds of aster sedum, goldenrod, all different kinds of eupatorium, anise, hyssop, I think it's called. No, that's a different. I don't know the eupatorium's common name. I apologize. And so our garden is right now more than 50%. Joe pie weed seeded in, so we have about 50% things that came in on their own. My own garden, which is just a townhouse above a 5-foot wall, spiral orchids started growing after I started composting the leaves every year. It's a townhouse garden on their own. I didn't plant them, so that's really fun. This is, I have a common name problem. This is at Mount Cuba's meadow, and this is non-native, Spigelia marylandica, but non-native to Virginia. But the reason I'm showing you this is to show you that a simple field is a strong field. And it's not that there's no complexity in this, it changes with the season, but all of us try to put singles in, and multiples are more natural. Here at Mount Cuba Center also, a field of ferns with a phlox in it. This is at that Combs Point again, which is the, thank you. Anna Maria Johnson says eupatorium includes snake roots, bone sets, and thoroughworts. And for me, like, I like to know the botanical names, so I have all the larger association, and I've just never bothered to learn the common names. I apologize. This is a relative of Joe Pyeweed here. So for your questions, just wanted to, you all have kind of a common theme. And so I start, this is Brett. Most of you are taking care of your spaces really well, maybe too well. So I would start with, if you're in a mossy environment, maybe trying not to mow, and see what happens. And in some cases, yeah, our Giratina just got moved. Mariah says our Giratina just got moved to Conoclinum. So sometimes it's nice to know the common names because they might get moved out of the botanical into a whole new genus. So that's a blue mist flower, just got moved again. So we have had in our neighborhood blue mist flower starting to come up this year for the first time because we're not cleaning up too much. So we had a large area that we had been mulching with leaves, shredded leaves for years, and a kind of snake root, which is a different snake root, not a eupatorium. That's the problem with common names, is came up under all of our, so we buy them. So the shredded leaves, Stacy Ike asks, how do we shred our leaves? The mowing contractor has a mulching mower, so that's been forever. We try not to put down nitrogen except for just a small amount on our lawn. We don't treat it, so we've had pussy toes come up in it and we leave it. But the mulching lawnmower will shred everything on the lawn unless it gets too thick. This year we're trying to mulch with leaves for the first time in the community in my yard. I've always done it. Just blow all the leaves into the bed off of the hardscape. And if you get too many leaves on your lawn because you have a really heavy canopy, as is shown in this picture, you can blow them around and you can run over them and then blow them back into the beds. In my community, there's a desire for things to look mulched, and so we buy mulch from Loudon Composting. Unfortunately, that's the largest mulch dealer in the region, and they're out of business right now because their land was sold to a server farm, and so they're trying to relocate. But you can use municipal waste leaves as if you don't have your own leaves. A lot of contractors will pick up your leaves, shred them for you, and put them back. Just sucking them up into a leaf collection truck will shred them, and I've done that before. Had the landscape contractor shred them because the homeowner didn't want to have a look of whole leaves, and I didn't have a tolerance for that. And then we just had them sucked up, dumped, and we respread them the same day. But mowing them works. Just spread them out on your lawn, mow them, and then if it's too many and you think it'll kill your lawn, then rake them into the beds or blow them into the beds. Amy Martin asks, what's the impact on larvae of shredding? The ideal is to not shred them. So the ideal is to leave whole leaves because you get a lot more overwintering insects in your beds. And so I think what happens is you do what your tolerance is or what your client's tolerance is. And so if you can get people to move to whole leaves, by all means, please do it. But I have people saying that they're okay with it and then coming back to me. And so step by step, choose what you ask for and do the best you can. For non-native species, such as Japanese stiltgrass, it used to be that, in general, I don't like using pre-emergence because, you know, then you can't, nothing seeds, but we have in my neighborhood been using a seed, a pre-emergent just in the grass because we had a terrible Japanese, everything was Japanese stiltgrass Yeah, the Flora Virginia actually, I don't think is correct about conicolum. By the way, I'm sorry, I'm answering something else. Let me go back. So getting rid of invasive species is Japanese siltgrass in the lawn is good to use a pre-emergent. You can also use it in your beds, but you realize then you're setting your beds back. Nothing's going to seed for years until you get rid of it, but so it's a process. You might have 5 years where you need to use that. It's better than what we used to have to do, which is just nuke it with Roundup and that, or hand weed, and that's very, very difficult to do if you have any size garden. So we have 6 acres that we've been managing it on. And just a quick, so Stacy says she's been just hand pulling it. And if you can do that, if it's reasonable to do, then please do it. Mariah Harris, so on large sites for English ivy, I have cut it all down and then had somebody hand apply an herbicide. That's also how Arlington does it. It's just so much volume, and then you maintain that for a few years. For bamboo, you just have to cut it down and then dig up the roots. And if you can't cut it down because there's a property line, then a lot of times installing a barrier is the only thing you can do. If you have bamboo within your trees, it's very difficult. But I've taken it out multiple times, and you can permanently remove bamboo. It just requires you to work at it. So in a situation like this where you want to plant, first of all, I think that moss is really beautiful. So that's a starting point, and it's telling you something about the soil. Not as much as you think. It doesn't necessarily mean that your soil is acidic, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything except for there's some wet area, because moss propagation is all about water, or damp enough to grow moss. But moss will grow on anything that's damp. So I would just start in a situation like this with choosing some ground covers. A group of 5 or 6, and that like growing in with red oaks, looks like, and pines. And if you need evergreen, which a lot of people feel like they do, then use Christmas fern. I find that they're very, very easy, and after they get established, they're huge. If you have an area that's facing south, there's plenty of plants that say they're for sun and they grow in the shade, like different kinds of milkweed, which is a euphorbia. So I started to say a comment about botanical names. I always check my botanical names with "it is" or with "Q." There's a lot of disagreement. The "it is" the Integrated Taxonomic Database. USDA is sometimes behind it, so is the Virginia Flora. And so that's the one I go by. There's not always disagreement. I mean, there's not always agreement. So just to talk to you. So talk to you from that angle is I don't go for Virginia Flora names all the time. That's my particular maybe conceit, because I've worked I've worked with the Missouri Botanical Garden. Even the Missouri Botanical Garden, who's one of the leading people in nomenclature in the world, don't agree with Q all of the time, and so you know, you don't have to be right. Just do whatever helps you communicate. In a condition like this, which is from Cheryl, get rid of those dangerous trees, please. Take the ash down. They're so dangerous. They're brittle, and if you are going to wait for them to fall down and they're not going to hurt anybody, that's fine. But in the meantime, I wouldn't garden there because trees that have emerald ash borer are really, really dangerous. Then remove all the raspberries. So start with removal of invasive species. If you have invasive species that could respond to smothering, and sometimes stilt grass responds to enough shade, but not always. If there's enough water, sometimes will still be there. Then you can suppress it. But in general, invasive species means they're exceptionally well adapted to their environment and will crowd out everything else. Yeah, so the right way. Then after that, in this case, maybe I would plant back trees first, or nurture the seedlings that are coming up. I wonder, this is again the same situation, and is this stilt grass? Yeah, I think so. So I might try either removing a patch at a time if you have the energy, or using a pre-emergent. And again, a pre-emergent's going to keep the targeted pre-emergent for Japanese stilt grass isn't too bad. We're still we had a hypericum, an unusual hypericum, come up in our lawn, and a lot of new kinds of violets. So it hasn't, doesn't seem to be a broad-based pre-emergent. In the case of bamboo, I've seen Solomon seal grow on the edges of bamboo, but there's just really nothing that can outcompete it. It's a monster. They say in Japan, if there's an earthquake, you run into the bamboo because the earth won't, the roots form such a network that the earth won't fall in. So that's how much of a monster it is. I would try to remove it before working on your shade gardening. For a natural screen in this condition, these pines were planted as a plantation, and pines don't grow in their own shade, and so they, in a plantation style, which is just a whole bunch together. Pines don't grow in their own shade, so they drop their lower limbs, and then they're not a good screen anymore as they grow up. It's really fun to kind of imagine what might grow there, and maybe plant, serviceberry and witch hazel and winterberry holly along there as a mixed edge, and you would be surprised at how much screening you can get out of deciduous material. Hornbeam's nice, and then it'll grow up and it won't have anything at the bottom anymore. But what I like to do is mix small things with big things, and so you can use some fothergilla. In this case, to me, this soil looks a little shiny, and so what I would start with here is putting down some wood chips or a very thick layer of leaves and planting through it, or a combination of 2 inches of compost and 2 inches of leaves, and just plant through it with ground cover. I try to get all the liriope out, if that's liriope. Under your magnolia, it's very, very difficult to grow anything. Waldensteinia might grow, which is a barren strawberry. So at the end, I'll just kind of list out some plants that I think are really easy to obtain. But Heuchera americana, which is American coral bell, and specifically the one called Dale's strain, Dale's autumn alum root, they're really, really easy heucheras to grow. They're big, they're mostly evergreen. I use them as low shrubs. I find that the native hoary skullcap, so Encana is not the native, but there is a native skullcap, and will cover large amounts of ground. And I love mixing everything with woodland phlox, just because if you don't plant bulbs and you want that spring punch, it makes you happy. So for drier areas, those all will work. For super dry areas, you might try some Golden Star, or green and gold it's called, Chrysogonum virginianum. I find that different asters are great. There's an aster for almost every environment, and especially the wood asters. So Symphotrichum, and then there's also Eurybia, so blue wood aster and white wood aster. It's just not say so much. In this situation where you want to add something, maybe with a hosta, I think that this is a really good place to add some sedges. There's the broad sedges, and you can add some different kinds of ferns. I love mixing Christmas fern with lady fern, because Christmas fern stays dormant a long time, and lady fern emerges really early, and so they're wonderful together. In a wet environment, I would tend more towards ostrich fern, cinnamon fern. There's sensitive fern. We have so many kinds of ferns, and they're texturally beautiful, and you can plant all of them together. In a wet area, you can use lobelia. In a dry area, sometimes you can use lobelia if it has a deep organic layer. And you could, in this area, columbine would add a nice punch of spring. And again, I think some asters. Also, a lot of bees are aster specialists. And so it not only gives you this beautiful fall color, the aster foliage, but it also it provides a fall flower, and also you can feed the bees. So phlox in this situation would work. The hairy beard tongue, which is Penstemon hirsutus. So a lot of you have this situation on a hill. This is more stable. Some of you have soil that isn't ready, and you need to start with that soil and maybe give that soil a year to recover. So similarly in this situation, I think that a lot of you ask for color. In our native woodlands in the summer, they're going to be green, and so search for different kinds of greens. I find that different sedges mixed with ferns provide a beautiful textural and color contrast, and then add in, depending on your light, different asters and even some perennials, such as black-eyed Susans can grow in some shade. This looks, in this case, like a little bit too much shade. And so you want to define your shade. You'll have part sun if you have over 5 hours, or sun from the west and south. And you'll have part shade to all shade if you have 4 hours in the morning. So consider what time of day in the morning is from the east, or in the summer from the northeast in the morning. That's really a shady environment, and you don't want to plant things in that environment that want more sun. In this case, again, I think that the primary thing is to start with the soil. The soil's washing away. It's been attempted to be cultivated by lawn, and the lawn doesn't want to be here. In drier conditions, which this might have been before there was building, you can grow as a lawn poverty oak grass. And maybe on the upper side of this picture, poverty oak grass plugs could be added. And once it's established, it's so beautiful. It likes poor soils, and it will grow into a lawn. In this case, I'm sorry, I might not have, I think that getting the picture, so in this case, I really have to have a good idea of what I wanted the finished thing to look like. And so I would, you know, for me, I would start there. Pick what you want it to look like. And one thing I would say, if you wanted just it to look like a lawn but with less care, you could plant sedges, but you don't want to plant sedges up against a lawn. And the reason why is they feed into each other, and it just starts to be a big mess. So if you ever use sedges, try to keep them away from the lawn areas, and plant something else on the edge, a heuchera, a fern, another kind of native plant. If you have a slope and you feel like you're lacking color, you might be able to plant, but you have a lot of deer, so you can't use hydrangeas, which are always the source. Our native hydrangeas are beautiful color and so simple. Then you start looking for shrubby species that have fall color. And so you can try a Ferns tree. Sometimes they get rubbed by the deer. Almost everything does. Serviceberry has great fall color. Witch hazel has great fall color. And then start working through ground covers, mixed ground covers to get a textural layer. And then go ahead and put some pots on your deck and fill those with the flowering plants, because you're getting more sun on the deck in almost all cases, except for the recessed patio that we saw earlier. And I'm fine with just using non-native annuals if you can't, if you really need the color, and a lot of people do. So it's a psychological thing. And in summer, our native woodlands are green for the most part. Geraniums can bloom a long time, our native geraniums, and you could try those in pots. I was told earlier by Margaret that she grew a bleeding heart, the native bleeding heart, in a pot, and it bloomed all summer nonstop. So try something like that. I think this is a sugar maple here. It could be Norway, and I'm just not looking at it fast enough. In this condition, again, in our native forest, there's not always something on the ground. There isn't always something on the ground because, and the reason why we have spring wildflowers is because of calories. You know, everything has to bloom real quick, store all the energy, and and then we rely on a deep leaf layer to prevent erosion. But when we have a lot of building, then you're going to get it anyhow. And so you have to start working with whatever will grow there that you can plant. And I think gingers work very well. Ferns, and I would go with evergreens on slopes like this where there's water below. I'd work in as many things that are stable as possible, all of the evergreen sedges, and just try to stabilize this condition. Most of the flowering things require a little bit more sun. Even a lot of people are saying, oh, the erosion is because of the trees. The erosion is not because of the trees. You probably have less, it's been shown, it's proven science, that trees, all the water, even on trees in the winter, are not, is managed pretty well by trees. And so what you're trying to do is that the water coming off of things up from the trees, from the building, is eroding. And it's not, if you had trees over the top of your house and everywhere and no roads, or the roads completely were under tree canopy, you'd have less erosion. For little spaces like this, I would approach it as a collector and start putting really beautiful things in. Yellow bellwort, trilliums, gingers, the carex platypus, the blue sedges. There's a blue bunny sedge, which is a lexicomus sedge, carex lexicomus, and maybe some hydrangeas since you have a fence. And the same for this. And here I might edit out some of this growth after identifying it. Only if it's not good. If it's a bunch of hickories, maybe I would just let the trees themselves choose which ones live or die. Trees start out many seedlings, and then they start dropping out. In this case, this is the add more case. You know, this tree here, which looks like it's a hackberry, has a stem girdling root, which you might want to get an arborist to look at and possibly remove. But trees don't want you to plant right up to them. I'd leave it alone. I wouldn't try to keep planting closer and closer to this tree. In this case, oh my gosh, looks like you've got a lot going on, and that you need some scale. It's a lot of building around your trees, and so I don't know if the one right next to the patio is going to make it. Trees don't like to be disturbed right up within 5 times the diameter of their trunk. So I'd go ahead in this and let it grow in and start adding in some details, you know, some lobelia, some snake, some doll's eyes if you don't have children around, because they're poisonous. Cimicifuga, it used to be called, but I think it's Actea now. And more hydrangea, not just one, maybe 15. I think you can put lots of shrubs in. I like to plant in these gravel areas. I like to plant water-loving plants in them. It makes it so much prettier. It's still functional. And I think we're close to the end, and we'll start going to the chat, but just mow these leaves and maybe design a bed that kind of embraces your entrance and separates maybe just the U-shaped bed. And almost any of the plants that we mentioned will grow in this condition. So I'd choose 5 and start there. Choose something short, something medium height, and something tall, and you can have 2 or 3 short, 2 or 3 medium, and 1 tall, and then make sure their foliage is different enough that you can distinguish them. And I think this is the last one. When you have a really big space, that the only thing that's wrong with this to me is that they're invasive species. I might not plant at all. I might spend all my energy on, unless you really want to garden. And again, trees don't like you to constantly fuss under them. And so I choose an area and garden, and the rest I would just remove the invasives and see what came in. This may be the last one. This is in Arlington. It's the Master Gardener Shade area, and the question was, did they just remove some lamium, which isn't on the invasive species list in Arlington, I believe, and what could go in there? And I was wondering if you had tried green and gold there, which is the chrysogonum, and maybe you could mix it with some native alliums that are in the woods. I've also seen sedum tornatum grow in these conditions, which is very, very dry. And if you place a layer of leaves or a thick layer of compost from the trade center, you can grow beach ferns, and there's some gentians you might be able to grow there that are native. Maybe they're not native to Arlington, but they are to Fairfax. And wood phlox would probably grow in this condition, although you have plenty of that. And yeah, I think that's a number of things to try there. If there's enough light, you can try the lyre leaf sage. Oh, foam flower. Foam flower will grow in quite a low amount of light, and I've seen it all along the edges of the Potomac in deep shade. So. Now, thanks everybody for hanging in, for me rushing through, but I'm going to kind of open up the chat this now.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Would you like me to read the chat, or you want to just do it yourself?
Why don't you go ahead and read it, and then I'll answer.
Okay. So Maria wants to know what are some of the fastest spreading native shade ground covers?
Spreading, yeah. So spreading is, let's see. I think some of the fastest spreading ones are the Asarum canadensis, which is the Canadian ginger, or it's not evergreen. So the wood poppy spreads around quite a bit. All the snake roots and bone sets spread around. Argentina, which is the blue mist flower, spreads quite a lot. The phlox and the skullcap spreads. The things that are, you know, kind of really useful in the winter for holding a slope, like the sedges, some shade grass. Oh, I'll tell you what spreads a lot is oak grass, not poverty oak grass, but the chesnanthium. A lot of folium, I think it is. That'll spread. If you need to cover a lot, it'll go everywhere. It's almost a native invasive. But what I'd say is, if you want to cover a lot of ground, and you want something that's really functional to hold the ground, a lot of things like sedges aren't easy from seed, and they don't spread fast, and so you need to just plant 1,000 of them. And it's easy to plant 1,000. It's like planting 1,000 bulbs. Just get out your trowel and do a little bit at a time.
Alrighty, and then we have a question. What community likes to live under a stand of eastern red cedar?
Under eastern red cedar, I don't know, have you ever watched a farm field go natural? So the first thing that comes in is eastern red cedar. And if it's wet, then you'll also get box elder, which is a maple. And so in that plant community, actually larger grasses like it, such as the native rye, it's an elemus. And you might not like that look, so just consider that. But if it's a really old eastern red cedar, and eastern red cedar, it's just so shocking. I took a slide out of this, but if any of you drive past Episcopal Seminary on Quaker Lane in Alexandria, and you look up at the entrance to Episcopal Seminary, those eastern red cedars, some of those were there during the Civil War, at least one. And so a relatively small size cedar on poor soil can be very, very, very old. So, you know, it may have, if it's an old one and the planting around it's changed, you may be looking at a completely different kind of soil composition. Trees change the composition over time as they're growing. So they're actually actively changing the soil. So the answer to that is, if it's a young eastern red cedar, then larger grasses and things like black-eyed Susans. But if it's old, if it's a foot or more in diameter, then you can use anything that we have listed out here for dry shade.
Okay, thanks. All right, now, when is the best time to plant native seeds? Can I plant now in midwinter?
It depends on what you're planting. A lot of places, they want you to plant early spring, which is February or March. If you plant in the winter, they're just going to sit there. But some of them need to be cold, and so they have to be planted in the fall. That's called cold striation. So you can go either way with that, and so I would ask your seed source based on what you're planting.
Okay. Cheryl wants to know if there are any good plants that choke stilt grass.
No, just shade chokes stilt grass. So
I think Packer aurea actually can do it.
What?
Packer aurea seems to do that. I've seen that in a couple of places.
Yeah. Well, that's good. You can try the Packer. I think that's basically shading it, right? Yeah. It's taller, so you can try that. Anything that gets taller than the stilt grass.
Right.
I've noticed that if you have even a kind of a moderate amount of light, but you have a lot of moisture, it's really tough.
All right, so Jane wants to know what native evergreen ferns other than Christmas fern would you recommend?
I like Triopteris marginalis, which is marginal wood fern or marginal shield fern, some people call it. And I think that is a really easy fern to grow, and because I'm working on really damaged sites, I don't like to use ferns that are really difficult. But there are a lot of, there are some other Triopteris ferns that are native also and can handle, and that are evergreen, sorry.
Okay, and then someone asked, and I have this question as well, how do you identify the type of root system of a specific tree? and relevant important cautions. So do you have a resource that you could recommend, or how do we figure this out?
Oh, you mean whether they're deep or not deep?
Or anything else we need to know about it? Yeah.
What you can just look at the environment. So, trees that grow on slopes are usually reaching for water, or on what's called mesic, like at the top of they'll have a little bit deeper root system unless the soil is really rocky, and then that'll be on the surface. If you're working with a bottomland where you have mostly maples or a really wet environment, or kinds of oaks that can live in wet conditions, and which includes serviceberry and musclewood or ironwood, whatever you want to call the Carpinus carolina, and all of those species that are bottomland species, they're going to have surface roots. Sycamore. So because they need to breathe, and that bottomland's going to be flooded sometimes, and so they need to have something. The roots need to have air to combine with the nutrients in order to feed themselves. So they need to respire through the roots. If there's no air roots, then they're going to have a surface rooted condition. So that's how you tell.
Well, that's brilliant. It makes a lot of sense. And so if someone looks up a tree and it says it can grow in wet, then it would have surface roots almost certainly.
Yeah, I would say the only tree that's not like that is a hackberry. And a hackberry tends to reach for water, and so it'll grow in bottomland. It's very flexible. You'll see it in the bottomland, and it tends to have, it's not surface rooted.
Okay, and then let's make this the last question, so Melissa doesn't have to spend her whole day here. What to do about compressed soil and exposed roots of big old red maple in our backyard?
So the red maple is got exposed roots for a reason, right? It's trying to breathe. And you said why? Because the soil's compacted. And so the best thing to do, okay, there's two things you could do. If it's really, really beautiful maple, you could hire an arborist to come and mix soil in with an air tool. They spread compost and mix it into the top profile, and it'll preserve a tree that's declining. If it's not declining, then I would just spread 2 to 4 inches of whole wood chips across it. It'll protect the soil from compaction. If you use that area a lot, then I might use 6, but just don't put it up against the trunk. It'll cause the bark to decay.
Okay, so that's okay to do, and we're not going to smother the roots with the wood chips.
There's a lot of air in wood chips and leaves, and also trees naturally funnel water down their branches and branch structure and down their trunk. And so if you ever look in woodland, you'll see that there's not even leaves piled up against the trunks of trees because the water washes them away from just the flare, and that's a critical space to be uncovered.
Well, Melissa, that was amazing. I should have realized, but didn't, that shade talk basically means you need to know about the trees, and you are obviously the right person to tell us that, since you're also an arborist. So that was incredibly informative. Really appreciate that. Thank you.